T-Bitch. Let's go.
Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Vincent Green.
I'm your host, Noel John Toohey.
And this is Invasion of the Potty Snatchers. Let's get to it, motherfuckers. All right, Noel, as we alluded to with our amazing world-class sound effects there in the intro, this time we're going to come back with another episode of Potty Snatchers, but not just any episode. We're going to do a treat like we've done in many times before, and we haven't done in quite some time now, and that is a franchise Friday we got coming up for all these fine folks. And the franchise that's going to be the focus of this Friday is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, which, you know, because of the new movie coming out there in last month on Netflix, we thought it'd be the best time possible to go and review this fucking crazy massacre franchise to see what it can cook up for us and what we can cook up with it. So, Noel, what did you think revisiting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, and when's the last time you gave it all a watch through?
Oh, I've never given it all a watch through. There was one or two I hadn't seen of the newer ones. I don't think I'd seen four either. I thought I'd seen them all straight through. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's a huge property, but no, a few flew under my radar. And watching them all together it was great. Like, I mean, the 70s one was so the 70s, and the 80s one was so the 80s. It was absolutely insane. And then the 90s one was very 90s. They were very of their time.
Yeah.
They didn't feel, the continuity is absolutely fucked. Absolutely fucked. I he's just there with a family, and you're like, okay, everyone died in the last one. What happened to you? Where did
all
the
cousins? All the cousins.
Yeah,
we'll take Leatherface in. It works out well for everybody.
Everyone's dead again.
Oh, Thomas. No, it's actually Thomas in the remake. It's Jebediah in the old ones, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I was thinking it could have been called, I just said before we went live, that could have been called the Sledgehammer Massacre.
Yeah.
Like, an awful lot of people get taken out blunt force.
Yeah.
The meat hook massacre, it wouldn't have gone.
Loves hanging a guy in a meat hook.
Yeah. They loves hanging himself a guy in a meat hook, which I think would be worse than the chainsaw, to be honest. At least the chainsaw does its job, and you're done for.
Yeah, it'd be horrific then, nonetheless, but it's game over. Like, you know,
it's game over.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just an awful death. But I love the brutality, and when you go back and watch it, you realize just how twisted a premise it was. I suppose that's been diluted in your head over the years. It's even a bit slapstick and silly to you. But when you're watching, it's got like bone couches and old men that they feed blood to and all that kind of twisted stuff. It's really, really messed up. And it's really, really enjoyable because you know how much that branched out, looking at it in the 2020s.
Yeah.
How much that branched out into that, and how what huge influence it had in horror. Oh, huge, absolutely massive. What about you going back and revisiting them all? You've probably already done this at least once.
Yeah, I've done this 3 times before. Most recently about 12 months ago. I'm a big franchise guy. The reason I love TV series is the long form storytelling. The closest thing you get to that in movies is a big franchise. And even though the continuity is not always in the same way as TV series is, it's cool seeing how these stories or the characters or the premise or even the iterations evolve, and how different storytellers can kind of bring these characters to life in different ways throughout the different decades, oftentimes, especially in horror. But for me, I love going through a franchise. Texas Chainsaw Massacre for me is one of the franchises that I haven't seen as many as the other franchises, like a Halloween or Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. I've watched them to death.
He comes up in conversations. You say, "Oh, your Leatherfaces and your blah 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 blah." But the one that you're exposed at the least is definitely Leatherface.
Oh, of course, 100%. Because surely because of the brutality that is contained within these movies, they're not going to be on network TV as much as a Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, which is where we kind of stopped up our content growing up. So I've revisited this franchise many times over the past several years because I do that a lot with horror franchises. It's kind of how when people say to me, "Oh, how do you remember this? How do you remember that?" Because I've continuously rewatched the franchises over the years, so I'm constantly refreshing my memory. So that's why we were constantly kicking Mr. Goodbeer's ass in horror trivia, because I watch these franchises religiously. But of all the franchises of the OGs, as we talked about, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Leatherface, he's the one I've been exposed to the least. But I'm getting more and more exposed to him myself over the past 5 or 6 years. But in this first episode of Franchise Friday, so it's going to be a treat. We're going to split it up into 3 different sections. And the first episode, we're going to focus on the first 4 installments of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
which takes place over 20 years, because that would be 1974 to 1994.
Yeah. And
So they weren't like drilling them out like absolute, it's insanely, but it's a nice little starting point.
Yeah, it seems to me that with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, it gets dusted off every once in a while. You know,
Yes.
that kind of way, but more frequently in recent memory. Because like the later three installments, I think was 3 movies in 9 years, which is kind of a lot for Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a lot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so
Maybe even, 4 and 12 or something. I think it might be 10, 13, 17, 22, something like that.
yes,
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely been a lot more prevalent.
Yeah, no, so we split these up in a way we thought made the most sense, with the first 4 movies all being called Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 through 4, and then there was a bit of a hiatus, and then there's the remake, reboot, Sarah,
New beginning or something. Yeah.
yeah, and so we paired them, and this they'll be the second episode, and the last one will be all the attempts to revitalize the series. So no, we'll kick off into this episode now. So there's no denying the legendary impact that Texas Chainsaw Massacre had. Toby Hooper brought a lot of kids. He said they went down to 90-degree Texas heat. They were cooking themselves to death. There's a lot of kids that love film, love horror, just doing their thing. What do you think of this franchise? Like, its longevity is beyond question. It's almost 50 years old. Like, what do you think of it? When you were growing up, did you see a lot of this Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the early movies, as in the same way you would have seen, or Halloween or whatever? Or
I've seen the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and to a lesser degree, the second Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I would say I've seen, I'm just going to throw random numbers on a wall here, pretend 8 and 6 times respectively. Yeah. I was well versed in those 2 movies. I loved them. They were almost like, your hall pass to a conversation with people who like horror. It just felt if you showed up and you go, but I've never seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It just seems like you're not allowed. It's like that fanboy thing. You're just not allowed to do that. So I was well versed in the first 2. And the first 2, to me, especially looking at the franchise, the 3 and 4, I felt like 3 and 4 kind of wanted to be the first one again. They even had that like dinner scene where like, you're tied, which the second one did too. But the second one seemed like it was actually trying to be at least a different film, or the film taking place in a different time. It seemed to have actual continuity, especially bringing back some characters from the first one. But I loved the first 2. When I went back to watch them again, with kind of like a clean slate, and I can laugh at the campiness of it, and you can also be that kill. The first kill in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most iconic kills I've ever seen in my life, and it'll always be that.
The girl gets dragged into the house.
No, that's the second, because she goes in after her boyfriend, and that's where the big door opens up, and he gets hit in the head with a lump hammer. And I realized earlier in the car, the guy who was in the wheelchair, I should have looked up his name, Franklin. Sally's brother, Franklin. He was talking about the brutal way they used to kill cattle. It was with a lump hammer, and often it didn't work on the first swing, so they have to hit them 2 or 3 times. And then later in the film, you see him, he gets hit, he falls, but he's twitching. And then Leatherface goes down and kills him just like cattle. And I remember just thinking, now that's horror done right.
Yeah.
Like there was foreshadowing. It was graphic. It was kind of, for its time, it's extremely graphic.
Yeah.
And I just went, wow, that's the beginning of, like, that was brave at the time to try and push the boat out. Maybe brave isn't the right word, but they tried to push the boat out.
Oh no, brave's acceptable. Yeah, brave's definitely.
And I don't think we'd be as what we can easily get away with now. I think you have to look back at certain films like Exorcist. I don't care if you like them or not. You have to look back at Exorcist. You have to look back at Nightmare on Elm Street. You have to look back at Scream even. But you have to look back at Texas Chainsaw Massacre and think they just like bone couches and, like incest and murder and people being literally using as livestock, and they just threw it all at the wall. That's what was so impressive for me as a horror aficionado. Nothing else pushed out the boat. And there's something, in these things, we love Michael Myers because he's indifferent to you. Like, he just kills you. Like, he thinks nothing of you. But there's something even more grotesque about being seen as lower down the food chain than you even are.
Yeah.
First 2 delivered that in a perfectly perverse, twisted way that I loved them.
The thing you mentioned about the cattle, the mutilating the cattle, or the slaughtering of cattle, it's kind of always entwined within, like, first the Sawyers that turned to the Hewletts in the remake, that they've always been this weird connection with the slaughterhouses in Texas. And like I think the whole idea was, Toby Hooper was talking about, and we see it in the 2006 prequel, that these people worked in the slaughterhouse. It was all shut down, and it's just talking about how capitalism has kind of abandoned certain people in these certain areas, and it's led them to become more and more desperate. And they're just an exaggerated version of this desperation in rural America at that time. And I think that's why he was trying to encapsulate how people become so desperate that they're eating their own, that kind of thing is like the most literal version of that. And like, not only that,
prosperity to desperation.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
American dream kind of in reverse.
Yeah, and you look at the home they live in; it's an old school, like plantation style house. Like, obviously, there's probably wealth in that family up until a point, that kind of thing. Where it just shows you the kind of the evolution of the American experience at that time, that went away from these big rural kind of areas and became more urbanized, and a lot of these once grand great places became dilapidated and kind of fell into ruin, and the people that were left behind were left to deal with a very bad situation, often turned to very desperate measures. And obviously not nobody turned to it, I was going to say nobody. I'm sure that it's minuscule how many people turn to cannibalistic incest, but like,
it's taken to a fictional
exactly
extreme.
Like, you talk about drugs, poverty,
but the underlying story is still there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the commentary he was trying to make at the time. But also, it's undeniable. He spoke about a very famous case in American history of Ed Gein, guy the cannibal who, as we both love Blind Melon, the song Skin, make a
shoe horse around your shin.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a lampshade.
Oh, German Skin.
Yeah.
So, you caught me in the middle making
rib cages into coffee tables.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I'm just making them into coffee tables.
Yeah, exactly. So, you got that song. It just shows all the different things he wrapped up into it. That he spoke about the kind of not going to say civil unrest at the time, but the civil situation at the time, the social economical situation in rural America at the time, and how he took a character like Ed Gein and said, if Ed Gein was put in this situation, I would imagine even more so if a family of Ed Geins were put in this situation, how would they react to the economical detriment that's been put upon them, and how would they fight back against the system? And these young yuppies, these kind of hippie kids coming through their area, is a perfect symbolism of the system that they're fighting against in their mind.
Showing up in their back garden.
Yeah, exactly. In the same way, I think Southern Americans call them carpetbaggers, the guys that come in and kind of pretty much take everything out of an area, all the natural resources, all the things that are valuable, and then go back up north again. So I just think it's the case of that, where he managed to capture a lot of these different things. And even though it's like a very, on the face of things, it's a very kind of single note movie where it's very raw, rough, and ready, especially the original. But you have all these things wrapped up into it, and that's how you use horror properly. Kind of, so I just thought it was very cleverly done. But something you touched on there was like you'd seen part one a lot more than part two, and so have I. Well, I think there's a 12-year gap between part one and part two. And that's very rare, especially back in the 70s and 80s, actually even going onwards to modern times, when you have a very successful horror movie, because they're so hard to get so right, that oftentimes we get many sequels very quickly after. And maybe it's something to do with Tobe Hooper probably owning the rights, probably to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That was 12 years later that we got to see this movie get a follow-up. Do you think it's a case of creative control in Tobe Hooper? I know he came back and did a sequel, or is it the movie itself was so polarizing at the time that it needed another generation to come about and needed to shift its mindset so people be more open-minded to seeing another installment in this franchise?
Yeah, because I say there was a yin yang to making a movie like this. Of course, he galvanized himself in the horror community, and I'm sure there was a lot of pushback, and I'm sure there was a lot of questions that had to be answered. And then, you make this thing and you're proud of it, and you maybe stand back and kind of go, you know what, I am not doing that again in any hurry. I'm just not. And it doesn't matter. Yes, there's a financial component, but we've seen people walk away from extremely lucrative jobs. Seinfeld gave up the ghost, just said, Dave Chappelle. He just, absolutely. Their bank account could have got fatter, but they had money. They weren't going to struggle that way. So they walked away. And I think maybe I actually don't know, but 12 years when you have a franchise that kind of grips the nation, because there is no such thing as bad press, and it's always kind of been true.
If you're a horror movie.
Especially if you're a horror movie, to give the fact that we're not supposed to watch it is probably a big driving force for young kids to actually watch horror.
Yeah, the forbidden fruit.
The forbidden fruit, exactly. But with this one, I think it came back. I think it was definitely a lot campier. It was a lot more 80s.
Yeah, he did it on purpose.
The original. Yeah. So I think he came back and said, you know what, maybe this will be a little bit less stressful.
Yeah.
You know, and it still had a lot of those, it hit all of those notes, but I think it wasn't as twisted. It just didn't feel as twisted as the first one, even though he shows up to those two douchebags in the car and he's wearing his brother's corpse suit from the first film.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like they tried to.
The guys on the radio.
The two dickheads on the radio. And let's play chicken with this truck. Oh God, you wanted them to die the second they were on there. But yeah, no, I really liked the second film, but the second film was definitely an easier watch.
Yeah,
it wasn't, even when she's at the table and they're doing the grandfather character is still alive, all of that. It didn't hit the same gritty tones. Yeah. Whether that's, I felt like it wasn't supposed to. Yeah. I mean, you know, Dennis Hopper going in there with chainsaws, just armed with a series of chainsaws, which is just not the way to go about it.
Like, I'm just going to tell anyone, if you want to counteract someone with a chainsaw, don't bring in more chainsaws to the fight. Yeah. Bring a gun.
Yeah.
Right. Because if someone's coming at me with a chainsaw and I'm armed with a gun, I'm just going to shoot the saw where it has petrol.
Oh my God.
Game over.
I did a rundown of horror weapons, and he started with, like, let's just say the kitchen knife, and he got all the way up to like guns and stuff. But he was saying like the sword is better than the chainsaw. If you hit a chainsaw with a sword, the chain will dislodge.
Yeah,
it's not actually a great melee weapon. Now, don't get me wrong. If it gets you, the person, you put your hand up to stop it. It doesn't matter. It's a chainsaw. It's going to slice through you.
Yeah,
but it's actually not a great offensive weapon, even against other handheld offensive weapons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Most saws aren't, because you have to do the sawing motion to use them. So, you know
absolutely.
What I mean? Yeah. So without friction, they're nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
that's it. So yeah, going in there with chains again, that was just the campiness, and he was the uncle of Sally and Franklin from the first movie.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that she went into a catatonic state, which is why she wasn't. And I guess the truck driver was killed, and the guy who drove the car away with her just didn't want his wife to know where he was or something. I don't know. See, this is the thing. You have to start straight away. You have to give it liberties.
Yeah.
Where did he go?
Like, for the 12 years. Yeah.
Where'd you go for the 12 years? You know.
Yeah. I think what catches a lot of people off guard, and I know for a fact Toby Hooper did this on purpose, was to change the tone completely. Like, even if you look at the movie poster of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, it's a complete satire of the Breakfast Club. That was at around the same time. He did that on purpose to mirror the movie poster of the Breakfast Club. So he was kind of doing this weird satire. But I just thought it was a very massive shift in tones. And that's why when you leave a franchise 12 years on the shelf and you have a director coming back, he's going to obviously evolve as a human being in terms of his taste and style, especially if he stays within the industry like Toby Hooper did. So when it comes time to make a sequel, when you have a very raw, very real, very authentic looking 1974 style and tone, it really captured the era, and Texas Chainsaw.
It really did. That's shock factor that the 70s had.
Yeah,
it's just an excellent example.
There's something about that cinematography. It looks so real, and then when you compare it to the satire and the over-the-top nature, the kind of grotesque gore that he tried to implement in part 2, I'm not sure if it was the right idea, but I can applaud both of them for completely different reasons and why they're both actually excellent horror movies. The first time I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, it was probably within the last 10 years. And I was like, oh, that's not great. And then the more and more I watch it, the more and more I appreciate it. And the fact that I know now that Toby Hooper intentionally went for that tone, and it wasn't just some sort of fucking like weird sidestep, like, and he made this like weird kind of outlandish movie. But he did this purposely. He made this movie. He wanted a satire to kind of the movies of the era at the time in the mid 80s. And he wanted to make this kind of weird kind of family movie, but they're all like this weird kind of, I said weird like 4 times there, but they're all this kind of.
Was it weird, Vinny?
I think it was a little weird. I think it was weird. Texas Weird Saw Massacre.
But having Leatherface fall in love with Stretch and have him like doing those weird gyrations towards
you're saying it.
Stuff. God damn it.
All right, that's the end of the podcast about it.
That's the end of the podcast. Are these eerie or unnatural?
Did you check up the synonyms?
I'm looking at synonyms. Mysterious.
But so like I can understand why he shifted his tone, because obviously he changed so much as a creator in 12 years, which is unstoppable. Like it's something that you can't really be
And
held.
the 80s is not the 70s. That's kind
Yeah,
of unstoppable as well, you know?
yeah, exactly. Like, so he probably went from like an acid director to a cocaine director. So it's,
You know
you know what I
what?
mean?
Well said. I think that's probably what it was.
Yeah,
That definitely had a more cocaine feel.
yeah. So whereas the first one kind of used its rawness and its brutality to kind of create its intensity, the second one tried to use a more of a high octane story. The story was very fast paced. It moved along quite quickly. It introduced a lot
It
of its
did.
key elements very early on. Like Leatherface, as you said, was in pretty much the opening sequence. Like two guys on a bridge on a radio station. They're trash talking some guy. No, they're road rage and some guy in a pickup truck, I think, isn't it? And then
Yeah.
Leatherface
They,
jumps
they
in the
play
back of the
chicken
car.
with him, and yeah, then he catches up with them.
Yeah, so I just think that the second one, because of its difference in style, tried to implement its intensity in a very different way, and it just didn't really resonate the same way as the first one to a wider audience. But to me, I think it was very cleverly done, and I can understand the reasons for the shift in tone and style, because obviously Toby Hooper himself has shifted in as a human being, because over a decade later, God knows the different exposures he had, different things, the types of media or content that he was in digesting over that
Yeah.
12-year period. So it's unhelpful. It's something that can't be helped when you change so much as a person, that your style will change along with it. And I think that's the reason we have such a divergence between the style and tone of Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 1 in 1974 and Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 in 1986. But like after those two movies came about and the impact they had, we were obviously going to see more in the franchise. That was without doubt. So the next one we got to see was the one we touched upon a little bit before we started recording, because you couldn't remember who the because this franchise has a weird like ability to grab young stars before they make it big and put
Oh
them in
my
the
God.
movie.
Not bad. It got bizarre. It
Yeah,
got weird.
yeah,
The names you were not expecting.
yeah. So in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3, we got to see Viggo Mortensen, Ari Goren himself show up as pretty much the main villain. Because I think the problem with
He played
Leatherface,
the hitchhiker guy this time round, you know, not that he ever actually gets the ride, but that was his whole thing.
yeah, I think it was like I think when you have a case like Leatherface, because he doesn't speak, they have this what's the word I'm looking for? Like a temptation to add a secondary villain. And it seems to be a thing that happens a lot with these Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, that because Leatherface cannot carry the movie by himself as a singular villain, which is something we'll talk about in the Netflix movie later on, that we see a Viggo Mortensen, we see a Matthew McConaughey in Part 4, we see like who's that dude that hangs out with him, the guy with the steel plate in his head in Part 2, you know what I mean? So oftentimes there's someone that's kind of the mouth of Leatherface, the guy
Yeah.
holding his leash.
Who could bring the inside, like, it can be the bridge, the insane bridge between that kind of twisted mind and you.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's right there in the middle. Like, he can
Like
communicate, but he's caught up in it as much as anyone.
Leatherface is the weapon, somebody has to wield them, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
So,
That's it exactly. He's the muscle as well, you know. He's the one who'll get his hands dirty. He's the one that cuts the meat. It's just and everyone does have their role.
yeah.
You know, Drayton had his role in the second one. He was the chef. He was the one who did the cooking. But yeah, everything kind of
that's the somebody
the chili.
The chili, yeah, the fucking cook-offs. Like I thought that was ingenious that they were like literally feeding themselves. It was kind of like Fight Club. Remember, it's selling them back their own fat as soap.
No, that's exactly it. And they're you know, rewarding him for it.
Yeah,
like not only is he getting away with it, but he's being rewarded for it.
Now it's your turn to eat your young. That kind of thing, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean? Absolutely. Like, yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So when we watched Part 3, Lorraine, my missus, she watched all these 9 movies with me, and when we watched Part 3, this was the one we actually had the least recollection of. Because as I said, we only watched the series in the past 12 to 14 months, give or take, all the way through. So Part 3, I had very little recollection of. I could like. In terms of the final girl compared to Part 4, which is Renee Zellweger, Part 2 used to have a Stretch, and Part 1 was Sally. Isn't it Sally? A Harbinger or something.
3 has a Michelle, I think.
Yeah. So I think let's talk a little bit about Part 3 now. So in my opinion, it's probably the most forgettable of the entire series. What's your opinion?
Yes, I actually quite liked it, but I'm after watching all of them. I'm finding that it's the one that's fading.
Yeah.
It's definitely not the one I like the least by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely the one that just doesn't have the same
impact.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same impact. It kind of brought in, like, it had the Benny character who came in and he was like a survivalist, and it wasn't from lack of trying. I just don't think it landed. I think it tried to do too much of what the first two films had already done, so that in your mind it can get lost in the quagmire of what you've literally just sat through. Because I watched 1, 2, 3 in the same day.
Yeah.
And 3 just felt like it was trying to be number one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mean the best Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean actually trying to be the first film.
Yeah, that happens sometimes when you get franchises that go on through many installments. That you oftentimes see one that tries to revert back to the original style, kind of like Aliens. Like Aliens is completely different. Alien 3 tried to revert back to part 1, but like, we'll give them no weapons. You know, that kind of thing. Like, it's kind of like, we'll go back to the original ingredients, but we'll try to up the stake somehow. And that's what part 3 kind of tried to do, but it lacked the rawness, I think, of the first movie. It's like there's 2 of the movies in this that kind of came across to me almost like TV movies, and part 3 was one, and Texas Chainsaw 3D with Alexander Daddario, that kind of had a feel of a TV movie to me as well. But so like I think part 3, when you come to a franchise, is often hard to follow part 1 and 2 if part 1 and 2 are good. Like, this is something we always talk about in superhero franchises: the curse of the trilogy. The third one,
you try so hard to be something original while also not, because you obviously want to hit the notes that made first 2, and I think it got lost trying to hit those notes, and it didn't try and do its own thing enough. And it was, like you say, curse of trilogy. It just fell into itself. I think it just collapsed under its own weight. Yeah, like Viggo Mortensen was good in it. He was.
It's good in everything,
but it wasn't enough to carry it.
Yeah, it's something you talk about a lot with horror movies, is that like it's very easy to get your premise over, but you have to stick the landing. It's something that it's so important in horrors that then of any other franchise, because the reveal at the end or the big sequence at the end is so important in a horror movie that if you don't stick the landing, it really sours your taste to the rest of the movie. Do you think Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 is like that, or do you think it was just kind of poor throughout?
I actually think it just kind of fizzled out. I don't think it was. I think there was love put into it. I think they wanted so badly for it to actually work. It just didn't.
Do you think it was a case of part 1 was so like unique in the way it came about, and part 2 was so different to part 1 that when you have part 3 reverting back to part 1, it's smacked of lack of originality in comparison to the sequel? And
they tried to throw in like action scenes where eventually, like, the Benny or whatever, he looks inside and he sees they're torturing the girl, and he just, I don't know what sort of rifle or whatever he had, but he just starts firing in and killing everybody, and he shoots the granddad to death in the chair and all this kind of stuff. And then it's like a big shoot 'em up in a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which isn't really how they roll. Yeah. And it was just like, now you're just putting in action. Don't get me wrong, I like a bit of action in my horror, but Texas Chainsaw is about the brutality, and action and brutality are not the same thing. They can overlap, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
And like, you know, somebody getting their ear shot off and stuff like that. And I don't know, I felt afterwards I was nonplussed. You know what I mean? I had no strong feelings or no ill will towards this film whatsoever.
Do you think it could be a case of that's a bad thing, by the way, as well, because you didn't feel either or? Like, a movie should make you feel so.
I had general apathy towards it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Do you think it's a case of they're missing the point ever so slightly about what made the first one so scary? Is that these teens are so overly matched. They're so outmatched by the family that they're going up against, and Leatherface himself. They're completely helpless. They're completely isolated from the rest of society because of how rural this area of Texas is. And then when you put part 2, you get someone like a Dennis Hopper that can almost fight Leatherface. Like, you're taking some of that helplessness away. You got part 3, you got that guy Benny who has like a rifle and can kill all these people from a distance. Leatherface is not close to personal killer. Once again, you're slightly taking some of that helplessness away. That maybe sometimes what makes Leatherface so scary is not himself, but the people he's going up against. And sometimes if you give his adversaries too much strength, it sometimes take away that overall scariness of him, you know, that kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, when somebody who's aware of the danger is a survivalist by nature and is well armed, you are thinking it does take away that, like Franklin in a wheelchair, with absolutely no idea what's going on, getting attacked like going over rough terrain. So even if he had a run ahead start, he literally, his disability would mean that he just could not get away quick enough, getting attacked, that he was completely helpless. And that was a brutal death. So yeah, you have gone way too far the other way. And I do think that the helpless kids that kind of overcome it, but you overcome it because their other option was dying. That's it. That's how they overcome it, because there was nothing else to do. And some of them try to overcome it, but do end up dead. You know, so it's So I think it went too far the other way. I think once the tables had been turned in that film, Viggo Mortensen goes up in flames, quite literally. You know, the family get all but completely wiped out in that very scene. And then it just kind of fizzles out. And I do think you raised a good point. I'd be lying if I said I thought about it in those terms. But when you look back at through that lens, it does make sense to me. I like the desperation. I like the against all odds, you know.
Yeah, I think that's why, like, you know, when you look at like Friday 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, they stuck to their ingredients of putting helpless teens against this almost unkillable creature, like almost unkillable killer, like, you know, this kind of force of nature. And you felt really, really like scared for them because you could really relate to them, but you can't really relate to a survivalist that's fully armed that can go in and start killing all these people from hundreds of yards away. By the time Leatherface comes to him, he could probably pop off 8 or 9 shots at him and get the fuck out of Dodge if you want to, you know, that kind of thing. So I think so sometimes to heighten the threat factor of the villain, you need to really keep the threat factor of the victims down. And I think that might be in the imbalancing act with part 3, because they had too many capable victims, in air quotes, in terms of the adversaries towards I keep going to call him Hellface, but Leatherface. It's something you touched upon. I don't know if you said it on it, but like, is Viggo Mortensen a Sawyer as well? Are they related?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. They never, like, it's like, okay, everyone got wiped out, and he just like picks up and moves across like 3 miles down the road to the closest neighbor. And now he just moves in with them. And they also have a slaughterhouse kind of set up at the back. I don't know. They never, that's the thing. So you look at it, and if I told you that, oh no, that's a rebrand, it's a revamp, you would have believed me, because you'd have absolutely no reason not to.
Yeah,
like you wouldn't even bother Googling it. You'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, it actually makes sense now that I think about it. I wouldn't, like, if you told me that, I would not check that out at all. I would 100% take you at your word. Yeah. And why wouldn't I? You know, why wouldn't I? What evidence was it? They never address anything that happens really before. Actually, I do. I think there was, they find a lot of bodies and stuff at the start, but that just means that murders have been happening. It doesn't mean that the original timeline is intact. I think they just said, right, let's just make the movie, and they got it together, and it was like, we said, like, I don't want to get bogged down in exposition. It's a twisted fuck up family tale. Let's just keep it that way. And in one way, I actually hate when a film gets bogged down in exposition. So if it was to be too much like, don't get me wrong, get the balance right would have been ideal. But if it was going to be one or the other, too much exposition or none, I'd rather have none.
Yeah, exactly. But especially when it comes to something you just said was like, they're just a crazy bunch of family that kind of kill and torture people and have a slaughterhouse their own. That's enough exposition for me.
Yes.
Because of the type of people who they are, explains their motives. I don't need to know their motives, because their motives are just they're batshit crazy and they like to eat people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And probably have.
It's kind of like the landscape, like you kind of alluded to earlier, is the landscape and the era that kind of gives you your storyline. Like you said, we have the word now, and that's like gentrification. It's moving resources from one areas into other areas, even taking over those areas in an industrious sense, bleeding the industries from other areas. You know, and like that's your overlap, and then you can just have fun inside of it. They're not a complicated family. They're not an intelligent family.
Yeah.
You know, they're borderline bestial, but so you don't have to bog down in exposition too much. Although I think Viggo Mortensen was the first kind of, like, you could imagine him being a cross-country serial killer character they brought in. Like, he was a little bit smooth. Yeah,
like the Green River Killer or something, that kind of unassuming, kind of slightly charming kind of dude.
And devious. Like, he was like, oh no, get out of here, like trying to, but like it was all part of his plan. He was like, he was playing them from the moment he met them. So he was the first kind of that kind of character that they brought in. But yeah, it didn't need to bog itself down.
Yeah. So do you just think part 3 is a case of trying to be too much like the original when you had such a unique sequel that it became in direct comparison to the original, whereas the sequel avoided comparisons because it was so different?
The sequel of even though it touched on the whole like dinner scene, which they just seem to insist on having. There's a girl tied up at the top table, and she meets the entire family, and she says nasty things to them, and they tell her to watch her tone. that sort of thing. But yeah, I do. I just think it was like this one, the second one at least had the whole radio station trying to solve a murder. Uncle of the original killed kids came in, battle between chainsaw and chainsaw and all this kind of stuff. The third one didn't have any of that. Like,
I'm gonna save you, sister. Dennis Hopper is like on 11 all the way through Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my God, he's so fucking insane. He's coked off his tatas in that movie.
Yeah, apparently he's on mescaline in one scene.
Yeah, sounds all right. But before we kind of go back and start kind of going through the first 4 movies, we'll go to part 4 and you can give me your thoughts on this. So something I said to you earlier was Renee Zellweger appeared, and so did Matthew McConaughey, whereas Texas Chainsaw Massacre kept this weird streak of catching actors like Dennis Hopper's in the sequel, like you got fucking Viggo Mortensen in part 3. Now Renee Zellweger, Matthew McConaughey's in this, and Matthew McConaughey's like something we said about was he's like the mouthpiece for the crazy family in the sequel or in part 4, and Renee Zellweger plays the final girl. So what do you make of this? And do you think when this movie was marketed first, because every poster I see now it says Renée Zellweger, Matthew McConaughey on it, do you think when this movie was marketed first that their names were banded about in the same way that they are now attached to it? Because I doubt it.
God, no. Who was Renée Zellweger in 1994?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know.
Oh my God, yeah, it was so. This is what I'm talking. We've got Viggo Mortensen now. We've got Matthew McConaughey and Renée Zellweger showing up. Like these people will go on to have absolutely ludicrous careers. Yeah, I know, but that's it. You know, Jennifer Aniston, and it just seems strange now that she was in Leprechaun and stuff. But here we are. You know,
Kevin Bacon and Friday the 13th.
Yes. There is a scene in this I'm going to talk about before we actually forget it, but there's a scene where Matthew McConaughey showed up today. This one has prom night and they go for a drive and they're in a car accident where they shouldn't be in a car accident. That's how they end up. And then there's one guy hurt and one guy stays behind while the others go to get help. And Matthew McConaughey shows up and he breaks the guy's neck that's on the ground and he chases the other guy. The other guy had never had an acting class in his entire life. I've seen better porns. And Matthew McConaughey, who was just a great actor, was chasing him down and he was going, "Please, mister, stop chasing me. I didn't do anything to you. Please, mister, I'm tired." And Matthew McConaughey's like, you know, pure sadistic mode, and he's got the whole crazy eyes and bells and whistles. And it was horrifying. I've never seen a disparity in acting played out before me dramatically. Like, and then I think he just runs over him. I don't think it's a big, thank God. Like he just runs over him, and then he kind of puts him and the other dead guy in the back, and he goes and picks up Renée Zellweger a few minutes later. But I was just like, oh my God. Oh my God. Like the director must have been like, thank fuck I'd Matthew McConaughey. My God, like what? This wouldn't get off the ground. Like, this was a good film, I have to say. I actually enjoyed this film.
I love the way he snuck in the all right.
Yeah.
Fucking movie, like.
And it was in relation to some, he was pretending like, oh, you know, like batter up, or he was with NASCAR or something. Okay, we've got ourselves a race. All right. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
What do you think? I was going
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think it was necessary for him to have that weird robotic leg brace?
I don't get, and I'll never understand what that leg brace was supposed to be.
Ran by remote controls, just left around the house.
Ran by remote controls. He had like the master remote control.
Yeah,
like oh God, I don't know what that was. I wanted that. It was that one of these things that Matthew McConaughey might have insisted on, you know. And he has a remote control leg. No, Matthew. Remote control leg or I walk.
Yeah. But I just thought like it was distracting and unnecessary. Like I just don't understand what did it bring to the movie. Like they use it so often as a plot point as well. It was like when they were working up the script, I don't know if it was after McConaughey came on or something, but it was like there was an iteration of the script that made it the screen, and there's a shit ton of references to the leg brace. Like the leg brace is a central focus of this fucking movie. Like there's many times where he's like in a situation where he's about to kill someone, or he's actually killing someone, where the leg brace is either used against him for the person to escape or uses the leg brace to kill that person. Like one stage where he starts pressing on the button extra hard and he's like driving and just crushing the person's head. Like I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird plot point for me. I don't know, leg brace, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He crushes someone's head because apparently he can do that. And yeah, then another point, she gets the remote and just fucks them up. Yeah, no, it was a silly thing to focus on. It also had kind of stuff that was never revisited. I did like the douchey guy. The like the guy who gets caught kissing this other girl, and ends up in the car.
Yeah,
He was one of my favorite characters. He played the douche quite well. But Matthew McConaughey kind of he chewed up the scenery, but I think like when the acting around you is not particularly good, I think you might have to.
yeah,
And I think Renée Zellweger played her role commendably because she wasn't this badass character at any point. Again, like she's just survival kicks in
yeah,
and she does everything she needs to do to survive. It hit a lot of those tropes, but I felt this film had a little bit more of the soul of the
yeah,
first two in it than the third one.
yeah.
It had a little bit more drama. It was a little bit more twisted. It was a little bit more violent. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this one, I have to say. I think I was just in the mood for it, though. I think,
After part
you
three
know,
was a bit blah.
yeah, after part three was a bit blah. I was like, yeah, actually, you know what? I can definitely do that.
Yeah, no, it was a bit manic. The fourth one for me, and once again, I think which was kind of like an issue with the third one. Even though Leatherface is like literally called Leatherface, something we talked about before he came on here is like it's called part three is called Leatherface, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre is actually the subtitle. The Leatherface doesn't actually like appear a lot in part three and four in comparison to the first two movies. Like he's there, but like the central focus kind of happens upon is that Matthew McConaughey is kind of like the focus of the fourth movie. And I think that's an issue where the people that felt that they needed this kind of manic mouthpiece to instill the fear into the audience and it kind of distracted away from Leatherface as the franchise went on. Because like in the first movie, Leatherface is the main component of terror. And same with the second movie, even though we have that dude with the steel plate in his head. But the third movie, Viggo Mortensen kind of became the main threat in it, and in the fourth movie, Matthew McConaughey became again the main threat. I just think when you have these kind of over the top manic kind of characters, that when you have a silent killer, it can distract away from what was supposed to be the preconceived threat of this movie, which was
Yeah.
Leatherface. And I think that was the issue with Matthew McConaughey because he was so over the top that he became the central antagonist of the movie and he distracted.
Oh, he
away from
definitely did.
Leatherface.
I think Viggo Mortensen did, but I think and we could debate that. I think Matthew McConaughey did, and we can't.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it lends something, like we said, it's a way of almost communicating with Leatherface because this is somebody who can speak. But like in one of the more recent Halloween films where he's killing his therapist, and the therapist last thing he says to him is just say something, just anything, before you kill me, just say something, anything, and at no point does Michael communicate with anybody ever, and I kind of like that.
Yeah,
but I guess
he's got nothing left to say.
But that's it. But Leatherface is supposed to exist inside of the family dynamic, so I do get that it can't be the same. But I'm just saying that like him talking was never important to me. Yeah. But obviously he can't carry a film on his shoulders. If you wanted to have a cast of characters, you need characters, and that's what they got with Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the franchise suffers from time to time. That the central antagonist is supposed to be Leatherface, but because they obviously prepare him with a much more manic mouthpiece, that the manic mouthpiece kind of becomes the antagonist instead. And that was the balancing act with the first. Like with the first one, you kind of had that old dude, the kind of father figure, and he was kind of like the mouthpiece. But Leatherface was consistently doing the kills and he was consistently hunting people down. And I think when you have part three and four, Matthew McConaughey and Viggo Mortensen do a few kills themselves. And I just think that takes away from who the overall threat's supposed to be. And that's supposed to be Leatherface. And I just think that's where they kind of missed the beat or missed the trick from the first two, that Leatherface is the threat. He is this like rabid dog that once unleashed, you cannot put him back on the leash unless you actually control him. And very few people actually control him. And I just think that they didn't kind of let him off the leash enough in part three and four for me. And I think that's why they're slightly weaker than the first two, because they forgot who the threat was supposed to be,
Yeah, they got bogged down in these characters that they were trying to build up. Yeah. And they forgot that we don't need that. We just want it to be kind of have that charm. And that's the thing. That's like what gets so lost as these kind of grow is just this charm that we don't, it doesn't need to be, I don't know, overt or over the top. It doesn't need to kill like 50 people. It just needs to have that desperation and that twisted kind of mainstay that is the family. And this one was definitely like, again, it had like Matthew McConaughey could just be a serial killer.
Yeah.
you know, just like an actual not eating human flesh, not like staying with a, you know, incestuous family somewhere along the Bible Belt or in Texas or wherever. And he could have just been on the road killing people because, again, he had the charm and charisma, and, you know, he had the baby blues or whatever. He could kind of talk his way into and out of something. I like the family being twisted malcontents that nobody would, if they had free will, would interact with at all. I kind of wanted them. I like them to be kind of looked down on. You know, we look down on them, so they look down on us. That was very much so what the first kind of two iterations were.
Yeah.
And this one, like, I don't know what his deal. They gave him like a prosthetic leg or like a robot cybernetic leg, but there was nothing wrong with him. He was good looking, like, you know, in shape, intelligent guy. Like, you know, like, I don't know why he just didn't leave.
Yeah, they're probably like, oh no, we have to make him weird somehow because he looks too normal. So we have to give him like a fucked up leg or something. You know, yeah.
And they never even show a fucked up leg. There's just a leg inside of a brace, which again would have been fine, but I don't know what the cybernetics were supposed to be.
Yeah, they could have shown us like a fucking malformed leg or something, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, a malformed leg would have done the trick nicely.
But like, so when you look over the first four Texas Chainsaw Massacre installments, like, which one, like, obviously the first one was obviously the one that left the most impression on all of us, like, not just me and you, but the horror community.
But that's the benefit of the first Quiet Place, and that's the benefit of first Nightmare on Elm Street. It just
uniqueness.
The uniqueness is going to be there in the first one. If you can't, like, Quiet Place 2 was always going to be less than the Quiet Place 1 because that completely new territory was explored. So, but it's still undeniable. Yeah, the first one, of course, the best one.
Yeah, and I think, like, of all the franchises had, like, the first four, even though the sequel was very different in part one, and part 3 and 4 were kind of like more middling of the road. Like, in terms of the dip in quality, it held its quality pretty decently, considering the movies had a decent few years in between. It was like, what was between 3 and 4? Like 4 or 5 years, 5 or 6 years, 12 years between 1 and 2. So, like, I just think, like, over the first four horror franchises, or the first four installments of a horror franchise, where a lot of them kind of dipped drastically as they expanded. These movies didn't actually dip so drastically, even though, like, part 2 is a bit of an outlier in terms of its tone, that in terms of quality, it's still up there. You know what I mean? Like, so I think out of the first four movies, part 1's obviously the best, and part 2 is obviously the most unique. But, like, I just love the way it manages to keep its grotesqueness, even if it's in different ways. And that's what I like about the first four installments, that it's dead visceral, even if the viscerality, is that even a word? Visceralness. But even if that's it, like, so pretty much whatever word I was trying to use, but you know what I mean? So I just like the way that it kept its type of gore going along nicely. And even though the family dynamic type thing kind of does wear a little bit thin after a while, it's trope. It's, so I can understand why it does go back and depend on that, and because Leatherface is an unspeaking villain, even though we've seen Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers carry films plenty of times, they don't speak. So I just think, like, the terms of quality, it definitely doesn't dip the way a lot of horror franchises does or have. And I like the way it kept its score and throughout the series, so kind of understood what made it a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, if you know what I mean, and never lost its identity that way. So I can applaud it for that. But I think just for 3 and 4, they're just a bit flat in comparison to the first two, which were so unique, you know?
Yeah, exactly. The first, and it was just a case of what we do with horror. Here's a property, so we'll just make more of them. And I'm not even complaining. I'm just stating that as a matter of fact. But they try to, like, quite often the first ones, the personalities, like that were in any way relatable, even in a twisted sense, were the victims.
Yeah.
And then as they went on, I feel like it became more about, like, more dialogue and more screen time was given to the family.
So wordy.
You know, it became very wordy, and I get bogged down in that. And for me, the best scene ever is that first kill, where that guy the door slides open. It has virtually no build up. He goes into the house, says hello once or twice, door opens up, sledgehammer to the head. It was brutal.
Yeah.
There was no build up to it, or there was no I know it wasn't flowery with dialogue or anything like that. And I think as it went on, they were trying to get a little bit more like, and isn't this all very scary what's happening? But let me explain to you again what the situation is.
It got bogged down in its own exposition, isn't it?
It got bogged down in its exposition, which we've already kind of touched on, but it did, didn't it?
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't feel like they're trying to explain much, but they just spend so much time like, the dinner scenes get longer where they've got Renée Zellweger who have you tied to a chair, nailed to a chair, and it just goes on and on and on.
So I'd say
she even says, "Kill me or don't." Even she says
probably not even scripted. She's like, "I'm just done with this fucking scene." So
talking to the director, like looking dead-eyed at the camera.
Kill me. Get me away from McConaughey. He keeps saying, "All right." But he keeps taking his shirt off. Imagine that, just like every time in between scenes, they won't let him do it on camera, so he just takes his shirt off in between scenes.
He has to take his shirt off. He's allergic to fabric.
So do you think, like, before we get the fuck out of here, do you think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is at its best when it's completely at its leanest?
Yes.
Like,
I think yes, I just do. I just think the first Hellraiser is always going to be the best Hellraiser. Was made in a house.
Yeah.
I do. I think they try to go bigger, and bigger is not always better. We've said this 100 times.
Yeah.
That they said, but what if we like fight them like off world and there's 1,000 of them?
Yeah.
It's not like if it works, it works. Aliens worked.
Yeah.
But it quite often it's like that's not an idea. That's not a concept.
Yeah.
That's just it's cheap. Basically.
It's just more.
It's just more. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, do you have anything else you want to say about the first 4 Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies? You get the fuck out of here.
No, get the fuck out of here.
All right, folks. So that was this is Invasion of Polly Snatchers. I'm your host, Vincent Green.
I'm your host, Noel John Dewey.
And that was the first part of our franchise Friday with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Texas Chainsaw Massacres 1 through 4. And I hope you come back for part 2 because we'll be massacring with some more chainsaws. We'll be incestuing with some more cannibals. It's what we do around here. It's what we like.
It's what we do.
Yeah, it's what we do. We do what we do. What we do.
What we do. What we do.
Sorry, folks. See you next time. Peace.
Peace.
Yo, she bitch. Let's go.